Beneath the ancient baobab tree, where shadows whisper and roots run deeper than memory, there lived a girl whose voice could shake the heavens. Her name was Adanna Okafor. Born under the rains of Enugu, raised in the warmth of her mother's endless mercy, and crowned by her family as the last born of mass destruction. For 21 years, she ruled her compound like a storm that never passed. Her tears were weapons. Her tantrums, thunder. Her words, sharp as broken glass. No one could tame her. Not her father's prayers. Not her siblings' patience. Not even the elders who shook their heads and said, "That child carries fire in her spirit." But fire, my people, no matter how wild, will always meet its water. His name was Obinna, a man as calm as the morning lake, as steady as the Iroko tree. And when their paths crossed one November evening in the city of Ko, something shifted in the universe. For the first time in her life, Adanna met someone who did not bow. Someone who did not break. Someone who simply walked away. And in that walking away, he unlocked something she had buried beneath all that noise. The truth. Pause, music swells gently. This is a story about pride and its price. About the danger of raising a child who believes the world must bend to her will. It is a story for every parent who has loved their child into destruction. For every young woman who mistakes loudness for strength. And for every man who understands that real love does not enable, it elevates. Welcome to Echoes from the Baobab Tree, where the timeless spirit of Africa comes alive through the power of storytelling. If this is your first time under our tree, I invite you to subscribe. Join this growing village of storytellers and truth seekers. Press that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your life. And if this story touches your spirit, and I believe it will, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been humbled by love? Have you ever met your match? The entire restaurant went silent. Every head turned to watch as Adanna stood up, her chest heaving with rage, and poured an entire jug of cold water over the man sitting calmly across from her. The water dripped from his face, soaking his white shirt, but he didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at her with those steady, unbothered eyes and said in the quietest voice, "Are you done?" That was the moment Adanna realized she had finally met someone she could not break. But how did the most feared last-born in all of Enugu State end up in this shocking moment? To understand that, we must go back to where it all began. Adanna Okafor was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in October 1998 at the General Hospital in Enugu. From the moment she entered the world, she made noise. The nurses said they had never heard a baby cry so loudly. Her mother, Mama Chioma, used to joke that Adanna's first cry woke up patients in the other wards. But nobody was laughing anymore. By the time Adanna turned 5 years old, the entire Okafor compound knew her name for all the wrong reasons. The Okafor family lived in a large compound on Ogboni Road, near the popular Ogbit Market. It was a busy area where traders shouted their wares and motorcycles honked from morning till night. Inside the compound lived Mama Chioma, Papa Okafor, and their 5 children. The oldest was Chioma, a quiet girl who worked as a nurse. Then came Emeka, who sold car parts. After him was Ngozi, a teacher at the local primary school. Then Chukudi, who was studying engineering at the university. And finally, there was Adanna, the baby of the family, the one everyone called the last-born. But Adanna was not just any last-born. She was a terror wrapped in a pretty face. She had big brown eyes that could make you feel sorry for her one moment and angry the next. Her voice could be sweet like honey when she wanted something, but it could also be sharp like broken glass when she didn't get her way. And the worst part? Mama Chioma defended her every single time. On a hot afternoon in March 2003, when Adanna was only 5 years old, she committed her first major offense. Ngozi had just returned from teaching and was preparing her lunch, a plate of rice and stew she had been looking forward to all day. She left it on the table for just 2 minutes to go and wash her hands. When she came back, she found Adanna standing on a chair, pouring sand from the compound into her food. Not a little sand. A lot of sand. The rice looked like it had been buried at the beach. "Adanna!" Ngozi screamed. "What have you done?" But before Ngozi could even finish her sentence, Adanna's face crumpled like paper. Her mouth opened wide and she began to cry, loud wailing cries that could wake the ancestors. "Mommy! Mommy! Sister Ngozi is shouting at me. She wants to beat me." Mama Chioma came running from the kitchen, her wrapper flying behind her like a superhero's cape. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look at the plate of sand-covered rice. She just saw her baby crying and that was enough. "Ngozi!" Mama Chioma shouted. "Why are you making my child cry? What did she do to you?" "Mommy, she poured sand in my food." Ngozi pointed at the evidence. Adanna wiped her fake tears and said in the sweetest voice, "It was an accident, Mommy. I was just playing and the sand fell." Mama Chioma turned to Ngozi with fire in her eyes. "You see? It was an accident. Why must you always bully your little sister? She is just a child." That day, Ngozi went to bed hungry and Adanna got a plate of meat pie as compensation for being bullied. From that moment, Adanna learned the greatest lesson of her young life: tears were more powerful than truth. As the years passed, Adanna's reign of terror grew stronger. By the time she was 10 years old in 2008, she had perfected the art of manipulation. She knew exactly how to twist every situation to her advantage. If Emeka refused to give her money, she would cry and say he called her ugly. If Chioma tried to discipline her, she would threaten to stop eating until Mama Chioma intervened. And it always worked. The compound neighbors began to whisper about her. "That Okafor last born is not normal," they would say. "She has something in her that is not of this world." But Mama Chioma would hear none of it. "My daughter is just spirited," she would defend. "She will grow out of it." But Adanna did not grow out of it. She grew into it. In September 2012, when Adanna was 14 years old and in JSS 3 at Community Secondary School Enugu, something happened that shocked even her own family. Her class teacher, Mr. Okonkwo, had given the students an assignment to submit on Monday morning. Adanna didn't do it. When Mr. Okonkwo called her name during submission, she stood up confidently and said, "Sir, I didn't do it because the assignment was too difficult and you didn't teach us well." The entire class gasped. Nobody spoke to Mr. Okonkwo like that. He was known as the strictest teacher in the whole school. His face turned red with anger. "Adanna Okafor, go and kneel down outside my office." But Adanna didn't move. Instead, she folded her arms across her chest and said, "Sir, if you punish me, I will tell my mother that you beat me and she will report you to the principal." Mr. Okonkwo was so shocked that his mouth opened but no words came out. The other students couldn't believe what they were hearing. This was not normal boldness. This was pure madness. That evening, Mr. Okonkwo went to the Okafor compound to report Adanna's behavior to her parents. He explained everything calmly and respectfully. Papa Okafor listened carefully, his face growing darker with anger. But before he could speak, Adanna ran into the sitting room, threw herself on the floor, and began to wail. "Mommy! That wicked teacher wants to destroy my life. He hates me because I am brilliant. Today he tried to beat me in front of the whole class just because I asked him a simple question." Mama Chioma's eyes blazed with fury. She turned to Mr. Okonkwo and pointed her finger at him like a sword. You came to my house to lie against my daughter. A whole teacher, lying like a common criminal. Get out of my compound before I call the police." Mr. Okonkwo left that day utterly defeated. Papa Okafor said nothing. He knew that when it came to Adanna, his wife was blind, deaf, and unreasonable. As Adanna grew older, her behavior became worse. By the time she entered the University of Nigeria, Nsukka in 2016 to study business administration, she had built a reputation that followed her like a shadow. Her roommates in Njoku Hall complained that she never cleaned, played loud music at midnight, and used their things without asking. When they confronted her, she would either cry or threaten them. Most of them just gave up and tried to avoid her. But Adanna didn't care. She had learned that the world would always bend to her will if she pushed hard enough. She was loud, she was fearless, and she was completely out of control. Her siblings had given up trying to correct her. Chioma had moved out of the family compound. Emeka rarely came home anymore. Ngozi would lock her door whenever Adanna was around. Only Chukwudi still tried to reason with her, but even he was losing hope. On a Saturday morning in July 2019, after Adanna had finished her university education and returned home to live with her parents, Chukwudi sat her down for a serious talk. "Adanna," he said gently, "you need to change. The way you behave is not normal. One day you will meet someone who will not tolerate your nonsense and you will be shocked." Adanna laughed in his face. "Brother Chukwudi, with all respect, nobody can shock me. I have dealt with teachers, lecturers, roommates, and even police officers. Who is this person that will put me in my place? Show me the person." Chukwudi shook his head sadly. "You will see. The world is bigger than this compound." But Adanna didn't believe him. How could she? For 21 years, she had been winning every battle. Nobody had ever successfully stood up to her. Not her siblings, not her teachers, not even her own father. As far as she was concerned, she was untouchable. Then, on a warm Thursday evening in November 2019, everything changed. Adanna's friend Blessing invited her to a birthday party at a restaurant called Golden Cuisine on Independence Layout. It was a fancy place where young professionals and business people came to eat and relax. Adanna wore her best dress, a tight red outfit that showed off her figure, and applied her makeup like she was going for a beauty pageant. She arrived at the restaurant at 7 p.m., ready to be the center of attention as always. The party was already in full swing when she entered. Music played from the speakers, people were laughing and dancing, and the smell of pepper soup filled the air. Adanna immediately started taking selfies, laughing loudly, and commanding everyone's attention. She was in her element. That was when she noticed him. A man sitting alone in the corner, away from the noise and chaos. He wore a simple blue shirt and black trousers. His hair was neatly cut and he had a calm, almost bored expression on his face. He wasn't dancing, he wasn't taking pictures, he wasn't even looking at his phone. He was just sitting there, sipping a bottle of malt and watching everything with quiet, observant eyes. Something about his calmness irritated Adanna. In a room full of noise, he was silent. In a room full of movement, he was still. It bothered her in a way she couldn't explain. She walked over to him with her most confident smile and said loudly, "Hello. Are you at a party or a funeral? Why are you sitting like someone died?" The man looked up at her slowly. His eyes were the calmest eyes she had ever seen. They didn't show anger or amusement or interest. They just looked at her like she was a bird that had flown past his window. "I'm at a party," he said simply. "I'm just not interested in noise." Adanna blinked. "Are you calling me noise?" "I didn't mention your name," he replied and went back to sipping his drink. For the first time in her life, Adanna Okafor was speechless. This man, this calm, unbothered man, had just dismissed her like she was nothing. And somehow, it made her want to know more about him. She didn't know it yet, but on that November evening at Golden Cuisine restaurant, she had just met Obinna, the man who would change her life forever. Adanna couldn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned on her bed in the family compound, replaying the conversation with the strange man over and over in her mind. His calm voice, his unbothered face, the way he looked at her like she was just ordinary. Nobody had ever made her feel ordinary before. It disturbed her spirit deeply. By 3 a.m. on Friday morning, she grabbed her phone and sent a message to Blessing. "That guy at your party yesterday, the one in the blue shirt who was sitting alone, what is his name?" Blessing replied almost immediately. Even at 3 a.m., that girl was always on her phone. "Oh, you mean Obinna? Obinna Nwachukwu. He is my cousin's friend. He does graphic design and website development." "Why? Do you like him?" Adanna typed quickly, "Like him? No, oh. I was just asking. He seemed very proud and I wanted to know who he thinks he is." But that was a lie and Adanna knew it. Something about Obinna had gotten under her skin like a splinter. She spent the entire weekend thinking about him, which was very unusual for her. Normally, men were the ones who thought about her, called her, begged for her attention. But this one had not even asked for her phone number. On Monday morning, November 18, 2019, Adanna woke up with a plan. She got Obinna's phone number from Blessing, claiming she wanted to apologize for being rude at the party. At exactly 10 a.m., she sent him a message. "Hi, this is Adanna from the party on Thursday. I hope you are doing well." Obinna replied 3 hours later with just one word, "Okay." Just okay. Adanna stared at her phone in disbelief. Not "how are you," or "thanks for texting," or "nice to hear from you." Just okay. She felt her temper rising but she controlled herself. She sent another message. "I was thinking maybe we could meet for lunch sometime this week. My treat." This time, Obinna took 5 hours to reply. "I'm very busy this week. Maybe another time." Adanna threw her phone on the bed in frustration. Who did this man think he was? Did he not know that girls were lining up to date her? Well, men were lining up to date her, not the other way around. She complained to her friend Blessing on the phone that evening. "This your cousin's friend is very rude oh. I sent him a friendly message and he is acting like I'm disturbing him." Blessing laughed on the other end. "Adanna, that is how Obinna is. He is a very private person. He doesn't like noise and drama. He is completely different from the guys you are used to." "Different?" Adanna hissed. "He is just forming hard guy. Let me leave him alone." But she didn't leave him alone. For the next 2 weeks, Adanna found herself checking her phone constantly, hoping Obinna would send a message. When he didn't, she would send casual messages like, "How was your day?" or "Have you eaten?" His replies were always short and came hours later. "Fine. Yes. Okay." It was driving her crazy. On December 3, 2019, she finally got him to agree to meet for lunch at a small restaurant called Momongozi's Kitchen near Abakpanaki. It wasn't a fancy place, just a local spot where they served good rice and soup. Adanna arrived at 1 p.m. wearing a beautiful yellow dress and her best perfume. She had spent 2 hours getting ready, making sure everything was perfect. Obinna arrived at 1:15 p.m. wearing a simple polo shirt and jeans. He greeted her politely, sat down, and ordered fried rice and chicken. Then he started eating quietly, checking his phone occasionally. Adanna tried to start a conversation. "So, Obinna, tell me about yourself. What do you like to do for fun?" "I like quiet things," he replied without looking up from his food. "Reading, designing, watching documentaries." "That sounds boring," Adanna said with a laugh, trying to be playful. Obinna looked at her then, really looked at her, and said calmly, "What sounds boring to you might be peaceful to someone else." Adanna felt like she had been slapped. She tried again. "Okay, sorry. I didn't mean it like that. So, do you have a girlfriend?" Why do you want to know? He asked, still eating his rice like this was the most normal conversation in the world. I'm just asking a simple question. Then I'm giving you a simple answer. Why I'm single or not single is my private business. Adanna's mouth fell open. No man had ever spoken to her like this. They usually fell over themselves trying to impress her, telling her everything about their lives, begging for her approval. But Obinna sat there eating his fried rice as if she was just another person, nothing special. The lunch ended awkwardly. Adanna paid the bill as she had promised, but she felt angry and confused. As they stood outside the restaurant, she tried one more time. Obinna, I feel like you don't like me. Did I do something to offend you? He looked at her with those calm, steady eyes and said, I don't know you enough to like or dislike you. But I can tell you this, you talk a lot and you seem to think the world revolves around you. That kind of energy is tiring. Adanna felt heat rising from her toes to her head. Excuse me. You don't even know me and you are judging me. I'm not judging you, Obinna said softly. I'm just observing. There's a difference. Then he checked his watch and said, I have to go. Thank you for lunch. And just like that, he walked away, leaving Adanna standing there on the dusty street near Momondosi's kitchen, feeling something she had never felt before in her entire life. Helpless. When she got home that evening, her siblings noticed something was wrong. Adanna was quiet during dinner, which was very unusual. She didn't argue about who got the biggest piece of meat. She didn't complain about anything. She just ate her food silently and went to her room. Ngozi whispered to Chioma, something is wrong with that girl. She didn't fight with anyone today. Chioma replied, maybe she is sick. Let's just enjoy the peace while it lasts. But Adanna wasn't sick. She was confused. For the first time in her 21 years of life, she had met someone who didn't bow to her tactics. Someone who didn't care about her tears, her beauty, her loud voice, or her manipulations. And the worst part was that it made her want to see him again. Over the next few weeks, Adanna kept texting Obinna. Sometimes he replied, sometimes he didn't. When she suggested meeting again, he would say he was busy. When she tried to be sweet and charming, he remained polite but distant. It was like trying to hug a wall. No matter what she did, she couldn't break through his calm exterior. On December 20, 2019, Blessing invited both of them to her house for a small Christmas gathering. This time, Adanna was determined to make Obinna notice her. She wore her most expensive dress, fixed her makeup perfectly, and arrived early to position herself strategically. When Obinna arrived at 6 p.m., she immediately went to sit beside him. Obinna. How are you? I've missed you, oh. He smiled politely. I'm fine, thank you. Did you miss me too? She asked, batting her eyelashes. I've been busy, he replied, completely avoiding the question. Adanna felt her frustration rising but she controlled it. Throughout the evening, she stayed close to him, laughing at things that weren't funny, touching his arm when she talked, trying every trick she knew. But Obinna remained unmoved. He was friendly but distant, like a polite stranger at a bus stop. At one point, Blessing's younger brother, a boy of about 12, spilled juice on the floor. Everyone laughed it off, but Adanna saw an opportunity. She jumped up and shouted, This boy is so careless. Look at what you've done. Do you know how expensive this rug is? The little boy's face crumpled and he started to cry. Blessing rushed to comfort him, cleaning up the spill and telling him it was okay. But Adanna kept going. These children of nowadays have no manners. When I was his age, I would never. Adanna. Obinna's voice cut through her rant like a knife through butter. It wasn't loud, but it was firm. Everyone turned to look at him. He is a child. It was an accident. Please let it go. Adanna stared at him, her mouth still open from whatever she was about to say. The entire room was quiet. She felt embarrassed and angry at the same time. How dare he correct her in front of everyone? She forced a laugh. I was just joking now. Why are you people taking it seriously? But nobody laughed with her. The atmosphere had changed. For the rest of the evening, Adanna was quiet. She noticed that people were looking at her differently, and she didn't like it. When the party ended at 10 p.m., she left quickly without saying goodbye to anyone, not even Obinna. On the drive home in her brother Emeka's car, which she had borrowed without asking as usual, Adanna felt something strange in her chest. It took her a while to recognize what it was because she had rarely felt it before. Shame. The next morning, December 21st, she woke up to a text message from Blessing. Adanna, what you did yesterday was not nice. That small boy cried for a long time after you left. You need to learn how to control your temper. Adanna wanted to reply with a defensive message, to explain that she was just trying to teach the boy a lesson, that people were too sensitive nowadays. But then she remembered Obinna's calm voice saying, he is a child. It was an accident. Please let it go. For the first time, Adanna wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was the problem. The thought scared her so much that she pushed it away immediately. No, she couldn't be the problem. Everyone else was just too weak, too sensitive, too soft. She was fine. She was perfect. She didn't need to change. But as Christmas approached and the year 2019 came to an end, Adanna found herself thinking more and more about Obinna. Not just because she wanted to date him, but because something about the way he looked at her made her feel exposed. Like he could see through all her tricks and games and noise, right down to something she didn't even want to acknowledge existed. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2019, the Okafor family attended a crossover service at their church, Living Faith Church on Presidential Road. Adanna sat in the pew next to her mother, pretending to pray while her mind wandered. The pastor was preaching about new beginnings and leaving old behaviors behind. His words seemed to follow her around the church. Some of you are carrying attitudes that are destroying your destiny, the pastor shouted, his voice echoing through the microphone. You are proud, you are loud, you are disrespectful, and you wonder why doors keep closing in your face. God is saying tonight, it is time to change. Adanna felt like the pastor was looking directly at her, even though he was addressing hundreds of people. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mama Chioma, sitting beside her, shouted amen, without realizing the message was probably meant for her precious last-born. When they got home at 1 a.m. on January 1, 2020, Papa Okafor gathered the family in the sitting room for prayers, as was their tradition. He prayed for each of his children by name, asking God to guide them in the new year. When he got to Adanna, he paused for a long time before saying, "And Lord, for my last daughter Adanna, I pray that this year, you will teach her humility. Give her a humble spirit, Father. Let her learn to listen and not just talk. In Jesus' name." Everyone said amen, but Adanna felt a chill run down her spine. Why did her father pray for humility specifically for her? Was he saying she was proud? The thought bothered her as she went to bed that night, but she pushed it away. Tomorrow was a new day, and she would continue being exactly who she was. But life had other plans for Adanna Okafor. On January 15, 2020, exactly 2 weeks into the new year, she received a message from Obinna. It was the longest message he had ever sent her. Adanna, I've been thinking about our interactions over the past few weeks. I think you're looking for someone to date or a relationship, but I need to be honest with you. The way you behave and treat people is not something I can be around. You're loud, you're disrespectful, and you seem to think everyone should adjust to you while you adjust to no one. Until you change that attitude, I don't think we should keep communicating. I wish you well. Adanna read the message 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion. First shock, then anger, then something else she couldn't quite name. She wanted to send him a long angry reply, to tell him he was judgmental and rude and not even that handsome anyway. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. But then she remembered his calm face, his steady eyes, the way he had defended that little boy at the Christmas party. And for the first time in her entire life, Adanna wondered if maybe, just maybe, everyone else wasn't the problem. What if she was? She put down her phone without replying. That night, January 15, 2020, Adanna cried real tears for the first time in years. Not the fake tears she used to manipulate people, but genuine tears of frustration and confusion. She had finally met her match, and it hurt more than she ever thought possible. The next morning, she made a decision. She would prove to Obinna, and to herself, that she could change. But change, as she would soon discover, was much harder than she ever imagined. And the journey to becoming a better person would test her in ways she never saw coming, especially when tragedy struck the Okafor family just 3 weeks later, on February 7, 2020. It was a Friday morning, and Adanna woke up to the sound of her mother screaming. Not her usual dramatic screaming, but a sound of pure terror that made everyone in the compound run to the main house. What they found in Papa Okafor's bedroom that morning would change everything, and force Adanna to face the consequences of years of taking her family for granted. Papa Okafor was lying on the floor beside his bed, his body twisted in an awkward position, his eyes half closed. Mama Chioma was on her knees beside him, shaking his shoulders and crying. Okafor. Okafor, wake up. Please wake up. Chioma, who had arrived early that morning to visit, was already on the phone calling for an ambulance. Emeka rushed in and immediately started checking their father's pulse. Ngozi stood frozen at the doorway, her hand covering her mouth. Chukwudi was trying to calm their mother down. And Adanna, still in her nightgown, just stood there watching the chaos, feeling completely useless for the first time in her life. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, which felt like 20 hours. They rushed Papa Okafor to the University of Nigeria Teaching Hospital in Itukozala. The doctors worked on him for what seemed like forever while the family sat in the waiting area, praying and crying. At 11:47 a.m., a doctor finally came out. His face was serious but not hopeless. He had a stroke, the doctor explained. It was a serious one, but we've managed to stabilize him. However, he will need intensive care for at least 2 weeks, and after that, months of rehabilitation. He cannot speak properly right now, and the right side of his body is partially paralyzed. This is going to be a long journey for your family. Mama Chioma collapsed into Chioma's arms, wailing. The other siblings hugged each other, relief and worry mixing on their faces. But Adanna felt something else entirely. Guilt. Heavy, crushing guilt that sat on her chest like a bag of cement. She remembered how she had stressed her father just last week, shouting at him when he asked her to help with house chores, telling him he was old-fashioned and didn't understand modern young women. She remembered the tired look in his eyes, the way he had just walked away without saying anything more. And now he was lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak, unable to move half his body. The hospital bill was expensive. Very expensive. The doctors said they needed 350,000 naira immediately for the first week of treatment alone. The family gathered whatever money they had. Chioma brought 80,000 naira from her savings. Emeka contributed 95,000 naira. Ngozi added 50,000 naira. Chukwudi, who was still a student, could only manage 25,000 naira. Even Mama Chioma sold some of her expensive wrappers and jewelry to raise 70,000 naira. Together, they had 320,000 naira. They were 30,000 naira short. Everyone turned to look at Adanna. She had recently received 150,000 naira from her thrift business sales, money she had been planning to use to buy new clothes and a new phone. Her siblings knew she had the money. They had seen her counting it just 2 days ago, bragging about how successful her business was becoming. Adanna, Chioma said quietly, "We need your help. Can you contribute something?" Adanna felt all eyes on her. For a moment, the old Adanna wanted to make excuses, to say she had already spent the money, to claim she needed it for something important. But when she looked through the hospital room window and saw her father lying there, helpless and weak, something broke inside her. "I have money," she said quietly. "I'll give 50,000 naira. The shock on her siblings' faces would have been funny in any other situation. Emeka actually asked, "Did you just say you'll give 50,000 naira? Without anyone forcing you?" Adanna nodded, tears running down her face. "Let me go home and get it." That evening, as the sun set over Enugu on February 7, 2020, Adanna handed over 50,000 naira to Chioma without complaint, without drama, without demanding anything in return. It was the first selfless thing she had done in years, and it felt strange and uncomfortable and somehow right at the same time. Papa Okafor spent 2 weeks in intensive care. Every day, the family took turns staying with him at the hospital. When it was Adanna's turn on February 14th, Valentine's Day, she sat beside his bed watching him sleep. His face looked older now, more tired. She held his left hand, the one that could still move, and whispered, "Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the stress I've caused you. I'm sorry for being a burden instead of a blessing. Please get well. I promise I will change." Papa Okafor's eyes opened slowly. He couldn't speak clearly, but he squeezed her hand gently. That small gesture made Adanna cry harder than she had ever cried in her life. During those 2 weeks, something else was happening in Adanna's life. The world was changing in ways nobody could have predicted. News began spreading about a virus called COVID-19 that was spreading across the world. By March 2020, it had reached Nigeria. On March 30, 2020, the government announced a total lockdown in Lagos, Ogun, and Abuja. By April, the lockdown had extended to other states including Enugu. Everyone had to stay home. No parties, no gatherings, no going out unless absolutely necessary. The lockdown turned out to be both a curse and a blessing for Adanna. It was a curse because her thrift business completely stopped. Nobody was buying clothes when they couldn't even leave their houses. But it was a blessing because it forced her to stay home with her family, to really see them for the first time in years. With Papa Okafor back home but still recovering, unable to work or provide for the family as he used to, everyone had to contribute more. For the first time in her life, Adanna had to cook, clean, and take care of someone other than herself. She had to help bathe her father, feed him when his hands were too weak, sit with him during his physical therapy exercises that the visiting nurse showed them how to do. It was hard. It was humbling. And it was exactly what she needed. One evening in May 2020, during the lockdown, Adanna was sitting in the compound with Ngozi, both of them wearing face masks and maintaining social distance as the government had instructed. They were peeling vegetables for dinner. Ngozi looked at her younger sister and said something that surprised them both. "Adanna, you've changed." Adanna looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're different now. You don't shout anymore. You don't cause trouble. You actually help around the house without being forced. What happened to you?" Adanna was quiet for a long time, then she said, "I met someone who showed me that the world doesn't revolve around me. And then Daddy got sick and I realized that my behavior was killing the people who loved me most. I'm trying to be better, Sister Ngozi. I'm really trying." Ngozi reached over and squeezed her hand. "I can see that. And I'm proud of you." Those simple words, "I'm proud of you," meant more to Adanna than any compliment about her beauty or her clothes ever had. During those long lockdown months, Adanna also thought a lot about Obinna. She wondered how he was doing, if he was safe, if he thought about her at all. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that she was changing, but something held her back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the fear that he still wouldn't be impressed. Either way, she decided to focus on actually changing rather than just talking about it. By August 2020, when the lockdown was gradually being lifted and life was slowly returning to normal, Papa Okafor had improved significantly. He could walk with a cane now, and his speech was much clearer though still a bit slow. The physical therapy had worked wonders. But more importantly, he had noticed the change in his last daughter. One Sunday afternoon, August 16, 2020, he called Adanna to sit with him on the veranda. "My daughter," he said slowly, each word carefully pronounced, "I have watched you these past months. You are not the same girl you were before. What has changed?" Adanna smiled sadly. "Daddy, I was a terrible person. I stressed you, I stressed mommy, I made my siblings' lives miserable. I thought I could treat people anyhow and get away with it because I was the last born. But when you got sick, I realized that life doesn't care if you're the last born or the firstborn. Life will humble you if you don't humble yourself. So I decided to change before life changed me even more." Papa Okafor nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "I have prayed for this day for many years. God has answered my prayers." In September 2020, Adanna decided to restart her thrift business, but this time with a different attitude. She was more patient with customers, more understanding when they couldn't pay immediately, more professional in her dealings. Her business began to grow again, and this time, her reputation grew with it. People started calling her that nice girl who sells clothes, instead of that troublesome Okafor last-born. But there was still one thing missing in her life. One person who had started this whole journey of change without even trying. Obinna. On October 10, 2020, exactly 1 year after she first met him, Adanna finally gathered the courage to send Obinna a message. "Hi Obinna. It's been a while. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to tell you something. You were right about everything you said about me. I was loud, disrespectful, and selfish. I'm not perfect now, but I'm working on being better. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that your words changed my life. Thank you." She sent the message and put down her phone, not expecting a reply. But 30 minutes later, her phone buzzed. It was Obinna. "I heard about your father's illness. I'm glad he's recovering. And I'm glad you're growing. Growth looks good on you." Adanna stared at the message, her heart beating fast. He had heard about her father. Which meant he had been asking about her, or at least paying attention. She replied, "Thank you. How have you been?" This time, his reply came faster. "I've been fine. Busy with work. The lockdown actually brought me a lot of online clients. What about you? How is business?" For the next few weeks, they exchanged messages regularly. The conversations were different from before. Adanna didn't try to impress him or manipulate him. She just talked to him like a normal person, sharing her thoughts, asking about his day, listening when he talked about his work. And slowly, carefully, something began to build between them. Not the loud, dramatic romance Adanna used to imagine, but something quieter, deeper, more real. On November 1, 2020, Obinna suggested they meet for lunch. This time, Adanna didn't spend 2 hours getting ready. She wore a simple dress, light makeup, and arrived at the agreed time at a restaurant called The Garden on Independence Layout. When Obinna arrived, he looked at her and smiled. "You look different," he said. "More peaceful." "I feel different," Adanna replied honestly. They talked for 2 hours. Adanna told him about her father's illness, about the lockdown, about how she had been forced to look at herself and didn't like what she saw. Obinna listened without judging, nodding occasionally, asking questions that showed he was really paying attention. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "Change is not easy, especially when you've been a certain way for your whole life. The fact that you recognized the problem and worked on it shows real strength." Those words filled Adanna with a warmth she had never felt before. Not the temporary satisfaction of getting her way, but something deeper and more lasting. Respect. She had finally earned someone's respect. As they were leaving the restaurant, Obinna said something that made Adanna's heart skip. "I'd like to see you again. If you're interested." Adanna smiled. "I'd like that." Over the next few months, from November 2020 through January 2021, Adanna and Obinna saw each other regularly. He took her to museums, to quiet parks, to bookstores. Places the old Adanna would have found boring, but the new Adanna found fascinating. He introduced her to his family, a quiet, respectful household that reminded her of what her own family could have been if she hadn't been disturbing the peace for so many years. But their relationship wasn't without challenges. On December 20th, 2020, they had their first serious disagreement. Obinna had promised to meet Adanna at 3 p.m. but showed up at 4:30 p.m. without calling to say he'd be late. The old Adanna would have exploded, shouted, caused a scene. The new Adanna felt the anger rising inside her like hot water in a kettle, threatening to boil over. "You're late," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I know. I'm sorry." "The traffic was terrible," Obinna replied. "You could have called," Adanna said, feeling her control slipping. "You're right. I should have. I apologize." Adanna opened her mouth to say more, to let out all the angry words building up inside her, but then she stopped. She took a deep breath, counted to 10 like Ngozi had taught her during one of their late-night talks, and said, "Okay. I forgive you. But next time, please call." Obinna looked at her with surprise and something else. Admiration. "You've really changed," he said softly. "I'm trying," Adanna replied. That small moment, that choice to respond with calmness instead of chaos, felt like a bigger victory than all the arguments she had won in her old life. By February 2021, exactly 1 year after Papa Okafor's stroke, the Okafor family was gathered in their compound for a special Thanksgiving service. Papa Okafor had made a full recovery. He could walk without a cane, his speech was completely normal, and he had even returned to work part-time. The compound was filled with church members, neighbors, friends, and family, all celebrating what they called a miracle. Mama Chioma was in her element, cooking and organizing everything. But the biggest surprise of the day came when she pulled Adanna aside and said, "My daughter, I want to apologize to you." Adanna was shocked. "Apologize? For what, Mommy?" "For spoiling you," Mama Chioma said, tears running down her face. "For always defending you even when you were wrong. For not teaching you how to be humble and respectful. When your father was in the hospital, I realized that my protectiveness almost destroyed you. I'm sorry." Adanna hugged her mother tightly. "Mommy, you loved me the best way you knew how. We both made mistakes. But we're learning now." During the Thanksgiving service, Papa Okafor gave a speech that brought everyone to tears. He thanked God for healing him, thanked his family for taking care of him, and then he said something that made Adanna cry right there in front of everyone. "I also want to thank God for what happened to me, because it was the thing that finally changed my last daughter. Adanna has become the woman I always prayed she would be. She is kind, she is helpful, she is humble. My sickness was painful, but it brought me the greatest gift, a transformed daughter." After the service, Obinna, who had been invited by Adanna, approached Papa Okafor to greet him. The two men talked for a long time, and Adanna watched from a distance, nervous about what they might be discussing. When Obinna finally walked back to her, he was smiling. "Your father is a wise man," he said. "What did he tell you?" Adanna asked. "He told me that I did what he had been trying to do for 21 years. He said I helped his daughter find herself. And then he gave me his blessing." "His blessing for what?" Adanna's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Obinna took her hand, right there in front of her family, her church members, the entire compound. His blessing to court you properly. To see where this relationship can go. If you're willing. Adanna looked around at her family. Chioma was smiling. Emeka gave her a thumbs up. Ngozi was wiping tears from her eyes. Chukwudi nodded encouragingly. Mama Chioma was beaming like someone had given her ₦1,000,000. And Papa Okafor, standing there healthy and strong, was smiling the biggest smile she had ever seen on his face. She turned back to Obinna and said, "I'm willing." The compound erupted in cheers and applause. Someone started playing music. People began dancing. And in the middle of all that noise and celebration, Adanna Okafor, the former terror of the Okafor compound, the girl who had refused to listen to anyone, stood quietly holding the hand of the man who had finally made her understand that sometimes the loudest person in the room is actually saying the least. As the sun set over Enugu that evening, February 7, 2021, exactly 1 year after Papa Okafor's stroke, Adanna looked around at her family, her community, her new life, and realized something profound. She had spent 21 years trying to control everyone around her, only to discover that the person who needed controlling was herself. She had shouted her way through life, only to learn that whispers could be more powerful. She had demanded respect without ever giving it, only to find that real respect is earned through humility. 3 months later, in May 2021, Adanna and Obinna's relationship had grown stronger. He had officially asked her to be his girlfriend during a quiet dinner at his house on April 15. No dramatic proposal, no grand gestures, just a simple question. "Adanna, will you be my woman?" And she had said yes, simply and honestly. But being in a relationship with Obinna was different from anything Adanna had experienced before. He had rules, boundaries, expectations. He didn't tolerate lateness without good reason. He didn't accept excuses for bad behavior. He expected honesty, communication, and respect. And whenever Adanna slipped back into her old ways, which still happened occasionally because change is a process not an event, he would calmly point it out. Like the time in June 2021 when they went to visit his parents in their village in Oka. Adanna had been anxious about meeting them officially, so she talked non-stop in the car, jumping from topic to topic, her voice getting louder and louder. Finally, Obinna pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. "Adanna," he said quietly, "you're doing that thing again." "What thing?" she asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "That thing where you fill every silence with noise because you're uncomfortable. My parents are good people. They will love you. But they will love the real you, not the loud version of you that you use as a shield. Can you try to just become?" Adanna took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll try." And she did. When they arrived at his parents' house in Oka, she was respectful, quiet when she needed to be, spoke when spoken to, and helped his mother in the kitchen without being asked. By the time they left that evening, Obinna's mother pulled him aside and said, "That girl has good home training. She will make a good wife." On the drive back to Enugu, Adanna asked, "What did your mother say about me?" Obinna smiled. "She said you'll make a good wife." Adanna's heart swelled with pride, but not the old arrogant pride that used to fill her. This was different. This was the satisfaction of knowing she had earned something valuable through good behavior, not manipulation. By September 2021, their relationship had become serious enough that both families knew marriage was coming. Papa Okafor had several long conversations with Obinna, asking about his plans, his business, his vision for the future. Obinna answered every question honestly and respectfully. By the end of September, the two families had an informal meeting where Obinna's father officially expressed his son's interest in marrying Adanna. The wedding planning began in October 2021. But even during this happy time, Adanna faced tests. Wedding planning is stressful, and stress has a way of bringing out people's true character. There were moments when Adanna wanted to snap at the caterer who kept calling at odd hours, or shout at the makeup artist who was being difficult, or lose her temper with the fabric seller who brought the wrong shade of purple for the bridesmaids' dresses. But each time she felt that old familiar heat rising inside her, she would remember Obinna's calm eyes looking at her that first night at the party, saying, "I just prefer peace to noise." She would remember her father lying in that hospital bed, helpless and weak. She would remember all the people she had hurt with her mouth and her attitude. And she would choose peace. The wedding was set for December 18, 2021, at the same Living Faith church where Adanna had heard the New Year's Eve sermon about leaving old behaviors behind. As the date approached, Adanna found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Just 2 years ago, she had been a different person entirely. Loud, proud, disrespectful, manipulative. She had been the last born who refused to listen to anyone. But now, as she stood in her bedroom on the morning of December 17, 2021, looking at her wedding dress hanging on the wall, she barely recognized the old version of herself. She had learned to listen. She had learned to respect. She had learned that real strength isn't about controlling others, it's about controlling yourself. The wedding day was beautiful. The church was decorated with white and purple flowers. The music was perfect. The guests filled every seat. When Adanna walked down the aisle on Papa Okafor's arm, she saw Obinna standing at the altar, looking calm and peaceful as always, and she felt a gratitude so deep it brought tears to her eyes. During the vows, when the pastor asked if she would love, honor, and respect Obinna for the rest of her life, Adanna said, "I do," with a conviction that came from her soul. Because she knew now what real love was. It wasn't about loud declarations or dramatic gestures. It was about choosing someone every day, respecting them, listening to them, growing with them. At the reception, held at Golden Cuisine Restaurant, the same place where they first met 2 years ago, Adanna's siblings gave speeches that made everyone laugh and cry. Chioma talked about how Adanna used to be a terror but had become a blessing. Emeka joked about how he used to hide his car keys from her but now trusted her completely. Ngozi shared how Adanna had transformed from someone who destroyed her food with sand to someone who now cooked better than most people in the family. And Chukwudi, the one who had always believed in her even when she was at her worst, simply said, "My sister found her match, and in finding him, she found herself." But the most touching moment came when Papa Okafor stood to speak. The room went completely silent. Everyone remembered that this was the man whose illness had been the turning point in Adanna's life. "My daughter Adanna," he began, his voice strong and clear, showing no signs of the stroke that had nearly taken him, "you were born with fire in your spirit. For many years, that fire burned everyone around you. Your mother, your siblings, your teachers, your friends. We tried to control you, but we couldn't. We tried to change you, but we failed. Then God sent you Obinna, a man who didn't try to control you or change you. He simply showed you a different way to be. And you chose that way. Today, I'm not just giving you away to a husband. I'm celebrating the woman you have become. I'm proud of you, my daughter. Very proud." By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Obinna, who was always calm and collected, was wiping tears from his face. As Adanna and Obinna danced their first dance as husband and wife, she whispered to him, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." He smiled and whispered back, "Thank you for being willing to change." Not everyone is brave enough to admit they need to grow. The celebration continued late into the night. There was food, music, laughter, and joy. The same compound neighbors who used to complain about Adanna now danced at her wedding, praising the transformation they had witnessed. The teachers who used to dread seeing her name on their class list were now congratulating her parents on raising a fine young woman. As midnight approached and the party was winding down, Adanna found herself standing outside the restaurant with her sisters, Chioma and Ngozi. They were looking up at the stars, 3 women who had gone from enemies to allies to true sisters. I never thought this day would come, Ngozi admitted. I used to pray that someone would just take you away from us. But I didn't want you to change. I just wanted you gone. I know, Adanna said softly. I gave you every reason to hate me. But you also gave us a reason to believe that people can change, Chioma added. You showed us that it's never too late to become better. That's a powerful lesson. I couldn't have done it alone, Adanna said. I needed Daddy's illness to humble me. I needed Obinna's boundaries to guide me. I needed the lockdown to force me to face myself. Sometimes God has to break us down before He can build us back up correctly. As the 3 sisters hugged under the December stars, Adanna felt a peace she had never known in all her years of fighting and shouting and demanding her way. This was the peace that comes from finally being who you were meant to be all along. Not the terror of the compound, not the last born of mass destruction, but simply Adanna, a woman who had learned that the strongest voice in the room is often the quietest one. The story of Adanna Okafor, the last born who refused to listen to anyone until she met her match, became legendary in Enugu. People told it as a lesson to their own stubborn children. Parents shared it as proof that even the most difficult child can change. Young women referenced it when struggling with their own pride and attitudes. And whenever anyone asked Adanna what changed her, she would smile and say, I met a man who loved me enough to tell me the truth, and I was finally humble enough to listen. Because that is the real lesson of this story. Change doesn't come from people who tell you what you want to hear. It comes from people who tell you what you need to hear, and from having the humility to accept that maybe, just maybe, you don't have all the answers. Adanna had learned that lesson the hard way, but she had learned it well. And as she drove away from her wedding reception with Obinna beside her, heading toward their new life together, she knew that the loudest part of her journey was over. The peaceful part was just beginning. And peace, she had finally discovered, was so much better than noise.